Shall we be thought mad? The question wasn't asked by a novelist. It was written in a diary found beside frozen tents in a stove that had burned itself clean. The handwriting stopped mid-word, as if the cold had reached the man before the ink could dry. They never found what he saw before the light went out. Since then, other voices have gone silent the same way. Radio calls turning to static, footsteps ending at cracks in the ice, ships drifting back without their crew. The Arctic doesn't bury its dead, it edits them, and the stories it leaves behind never end clean. They just fade, one by one, into white. So go ahead, dim the lights, let the room fall quiet, and settle in. Because what you're about to hear isn't fiction, it's history frozen mid-breath. If mysteries like this are your kind of thing, consider subscribing, and tell me where you're watching from so I know who's still awake with me. Now, let's start where the last messages still made sense, before the ice began to answer for them. The ship groaned like something alive each time the floe flexed. Men tried to sleep anyway, not in bunks, but in low igloos they cut and stacked by lantern light. Snow sifted through seams. Somewhere in the dark, the Karluk creaked, pinned and helpless, while the ice under their new village kept sliding a little farther every hour. They could hear it in the night, the dull thud of pressure, the rattle of rigging, and then the long quiet that made them listen harder. In June 1913, the wooden-hulled Karluk sailed north as the flagship of a Canadian Arctic expedition. By late summer, the pack closed around her and stayed. Captain Bob Bartlett read the pressure ridges like weather reports, understood the hull was now a guest of the floe, and turned a trapped ship into a winter camp. He set rules that felt small and strict, because small and strict could be controlled. He cut canvas into windbreaks, set sentries for ice movement, and kept tools in places where hands could find them in the dark. Food tightened early. Seal meat counted for days, then for meals, then for bites. You could feel the thinness of the pot when the ladle hit bottom. Storms hit hard enough to slap the air, lines snapping like whipcord on the deck. Talk sharpened. Some men wanted to break for land on their own. Others watched Bartlett, waiting for orders and looking for something that felt like a plan. He answered by giving them work that kept fear busy. He taught igloo building to those who had never cut a snowblock. He sent small teams to scout for seals and set traps. He rationed coal like coins and fed a stove that smoked more than it warmed, the chimney ticking as ice crystals clung and melted. Then he pushed. Bartlett chose Wrangel Island, 700 miles of dog trail away. They left in teams with boots that froze stiff by morning and had to be beaten pliable before feet would slide in. Dog's breath hung in threads in the blue pre-dawn. They moved by rhythm. Lift the runner, clear the snow, call the dogs, count the steps, check the horizon. At night, socks steamed over a guttering flame. In the morning, a rifle bolt clicked clean because someone had oiled it before sleep. Those were the pieces that kept the day from breaking. Men split. A few walked out on their own promise and simply didn't come back. The ones who stayed with Bartlett counted cartridges and calories and waited for a sky that held more than weather. 14 months after the ice first took the ship, a rescue vessel found the survivors, and the floe finally returned their names to the world. Many were gone by then. Bartlett's long march and the daily grind of small habits pulled the living through. Up here, survival is a ledger of small decisions. Next comes a plan that lifted off the ice and never quite landed. The balloons skimmed low enough that the ropes scraped and snagged across the white like claws. The fabric above them swelled and sank as cold air chewed the lift. They called the craft the Eagle, and it moved with the uncertain wobble of a thought that wouldn't hold. Under it, small dark shapes on the ice watched the tracks clean themselves in the wind, then vanish. In the car, 3 men shifted weight to keep the basket level and kept their eyes on the horizon that looked the same in every direction. Solomon Auguste Andrée had rehearsed this for years. In July 1897, He rose from Svalbard with Niels Strindberg and Knut Frankel. They carried cameras in padded cases, homing pigeons in little crates, and a plan to drift over the pole and down to praise and handshakes. Hydrogen hissed. The lines trailed like whiskers. For the first 10 hours, they rode clean above the pack. Then the balloon brushed ice, dragged, and stayed low. Ropes bit into floes. The men hauled and cursed and felt the lift go thin. They landed hard on broken ice, and their machine became a heap, not a road. They turned to marching. The floes shifted like a deck with a slow roll, and the leads opened without warning. They hauled sledges, crossed on shaky bridges, and camped whenever the light quit. The diaries they kept at first read calm, meals tallied, a stove that burns neat and blue when the fuel held out. Notes on wind and drift. Strindberg's script stayed careful, lines even, as if that alone could steady the ground. As weeks moved, the entries grew short. Weather, a sore foot, a seal seen far off that did not return. The daylight thinned, and with it the words. Back in Europe, the funding and the fanfare had been loud. Alfred Nobel's name hung over the project, and newspapers ran engravings that made the balloon look like certainty. Soon the questions arrived. Was this courage or theater? Was science learning anything or only posing for it? Those arguments would wait a long time for an answer, because up north, the ice answered first. In 1930, a sealing crew stepped onto White Island and found what the sea had kept. Tents flattened by snow, a camera wrapped neat, film that could still be coaxed to give images. The developed frame showed a tidy camp and men who lined up gear edge to edge. Journals survived too. Ink held. The entries tracked routines and aches in a voice that never begged. Around the pages lay bodies where the last camp had been built, each in the place work had set him. You can hear the little things if you sit with those artifacts. A campfire crackling against ice that pops like a knuckle. Camera shutters clicking through thick mittens. The final lines do not confess. They report. Cloud low, wind east, pain in the leg. Then nothing. The diaries came home. Their last view did not. From air to ice again, another ship learns how the sea can hold a hull tight and crush it for good. The wooden hull creaked until the planks seemed to speak, and then the ice finished the sentence with a crack that carried through men's boots. In 1879, a U.S. Navy vessel called the Jeannette pushed into uncharted ice with a belief many held then, that beyond the pack lay an open polar sea. The ship found only walls. The pack closed fast and stayed. Masts rattled in cold gusts. Rime climbed the rigging. Below, the stove pounded heat into a room that stayed gray around the edges. They drifted for nearly 2 years, pinned and grinding. The ice pressed a little more each week. Timbers bowed. Rivets spoke. You could feel the squeeze in your teeth. When the hull finally gave, the crew stood on shattered floes and watched their shelter go down. What followed was a retreat across a broken road. They loaded 3 small boats and sledges. Men hauled, stumbled, and set lines to pull together when leads opened like trapdoors. They shoved boats over blue hummocks that cut through sealskin boots. When water ran, they rowed with ash oars that stung frostbitten hands. The marches turned into a method. Count steps to stay awake. Check each man's face for white patches before the wind turned them black. Snow squalls erased footprints in a minute. They tried to keep a straight path toward land they could not see. They cached what they could not carry, then went back for it, only to find the cache twisted by drift. Under the rowing, you could hear teeth chatter and the low talk people used to keep panic from rising. They kept their science even while everything else failed. Logbooks recorded pressure and weather. They noted ice thickness and drift. the kind of small data that feels pointless when your world is breaking. It mattered later. Years after the wreck, artifacts from the Jeanette turned up on a Greenland shore. That drift proved a current that crossed the Arctic from Siberia to the Atlantic. The data outlived the men who wrote it, and it helped build maps and models that explain how the ice moves. One man kept a letter home sealed in oilcloth. The paper stayed dry through weeks of melt and freeze. He never posted it. A folded promise rode with him in a pocket through storms, beachings, and carries, the ink pressed flat by sweat. Some of the party reached Siberia, others faded along river deltas, names recorded by strangers who buried them where ground would allow a shovel to bite. The Jeanette broke, but it left a trail that taught oceanographers and weather watchers where the cold river flows. Up here, the ice takes men and hands back knowledge on its own schedule. Rescue is not guaranteed. Sometimes saving becomes the deadlier mission. A red tent glowed like a coal on a white plain. Engines buzzed, circled, and faded. Then came only wind. In 1928, Umberto Noble's airship Italia reached the pole and turned for home. On the return, the envelope iced, the nose dipped, and the gondola tore free onto the pack. Survivors rolled from the wreck and dragged canvas, poles, and a radio set to a safe patch. They dyed the tent with fuel and made it red, so searchers could see them across the glare. They called for help in code. The operator tapped with mittens off, skin burning to the key. The signal hopped through the snow air, thin and choppy, but it moved. Countries far south picked it up and shifted to action. Ships broke from harbor. Planes were readied on rough strips cut out of slush and melt. The ice field around the tent looked calm, but the weather upstairs did not care. Squalls smashed wings, engines iced. A few aircraft landed, then could not take off again. Inside the tent, Nobile counted rations like a bookkeeper. Chocolate squares dulled between fingers. Wounds needed dressings, and he rationed those too. A small dog named Titina paced the entrance of the tent and lifted her head at each far engine note. Her ears were a better instrument than the watch. They learned to trust her flinch before they trusted the sky. The rescue grew huge. It pulled in Italians, Norwegians, Soviets, Swedes, Finns, and more. Icebreakers shoved into rotten ice. Radio operators in huts and on decks passed bearings and weather in sleepless shifts. Crews built temporary airfields by stamping slush and laying timbers. Pilots tried to sight one square of red in a maze of white. Some sent last messages and did not report again. A famous rescuer went missing on his way in. Others ditched on floes and joined the same cold wait they had flown to end. The radio became the only voice. It sputtered. Code went out into fog. Replies lagged or broke apart. Batteries dimmed as the tent chilled. They warmed the set under blankets and lit a small lamp to keep the wires alive. The sound returned, thinner each time. Names of search ships and rough coordinates crossed the air like thread through a torn coat. One by one, people were found. A few survivors were hauled up, thin and silent. Others stayed out there, searchers and searched alike. Bodies did not always return. The Arctic kept some and moved the rest under new ice. When it was over, the ledger looked wrong. The crash was the opening line. The rescue wrote the longer loss. Radios can save you here until their words thin to dots and dashes that end mid-word, and someone on the other end hears only the empty carrier and knows it means stop. A voice checked in on schedule. The first reports were full sentences. Ice thickness, barometer, coordinates read slowly, twice. Then each call shaved a word, then a line. Like a candle burning down on the charts in 1937, the icebreaker Sadov stopped being a ship and became a drifting station, locked into the pack with orders to ride it for years. The men on board adjusted fast. They moved cabins into labs. They bolted instruments to railings that no longer saw waves. The only thing that moved was the flow and the needle on the radio set. They made a ritual of the airwaves. Dawn readings, noon checks, evening position. At first, the messages carried details. Wind at the masthead, snow type underfoot, the rate of drift compared to yesterday's fix. Then the sentences got clipped. Static pulled at the edges, intervals stretched. The operator would pause before keying, waiting for the hiss to settle. He still signed off on time. The clock mattered because time proved they were still there. Life settled into a grind that wore at the hands, measuring wind with numb fingers, taking cores from a pressure ridge and writing notes while ink turned slush inside pens' calendars marked in blunt pencil, the numbers getting thicker as the lead wore down. You learned to fold a glove with your teeth while you tightened a nut. You learned the sound of the generator when it was happy and when it wanted a kick. Each report traveled through Moscow. Weather in one column, morale in another. Even if morale never had a line, you could feel the weight of that relay. A broken sentence might be snow. It might be a wire. It might be someone choosing not to pass a message that made a boss frown. Up there, silence happened for many reasons. Down there, it could mean more. Polar stations proved you could drift for years and still do science. Logs from other flows and islands survived, and some sets of numbers changed how people drew the Arctic's currents. But gaps still bite hard. You read a page that ends mid-figure, then the next book starts months later with a new hand and a note about continuation. The radio room held the shape of the story. A headset pressed into wool, a rag tied around the mouthpiece to keep it from icing. The operator leaning close to hear the side tone and his own breath. The last check-in sounded tired, like the voice kept walking while the body sat still. It still gave the weather, it still gave the drift. The Sadov outlasted its plan. Crews rotated by rescue and by luck. The drift rode a long line that crossed maps and budgets. The ending never lined up with the beginning, it simply thinned out until planners stopped waiting for a full paragraph. The ship became a legend of data without closure, found again only in scattered logs and ice maps. When radio fails, paper and bone do the talking, if they make it back at all. 4 young men stepped onto Wrangel Island with a flag and a list, and the sense that land means safety. The wind met them first. It came low across the gravel and snow, steady enough to flatten voices. They dragged supplies from the boat and set a canvas wall against the gusts. They wrote the date in a small notebook. It was 1921. The plan was to claim and settle the island under a vision that said the Arctic could be lived in if you only tried hard enough. They built a rough camp close to driftwood and a narrow beach. Their food looked good on paper. On the ground, it needed meat to stretch it. They tried the coast for seals. They set lines for fox. The ice did not cooperate. Leads stayed wide when they needed them narrow. The game kept its distance. The weather rolled through without a break. Each day took a bite out of their stores, and the days piled up. They split chores into hours. One man checked traps at first light. Another chopped driftwood that sparked and died fast. They mended boots with thread that cracked in cold. The journal kept track. Rations by weight. Powder left for cartridges. A note about a birthday and no cake, just tea gone thin and a page marked with a thumbprint. In the margin, a small sketch of a seal, clean lines and hopeful, drawn by someone who wanted to see it near and never did. A storm pinned them 3 days, then another in the same week. They dug out the tent and shifted it behind a low ridge. They watched the beach for bears and found tracks that circled and moved on. Leadership sat far away on a map. Promises of resupply lived on the sea that did not fill with ships. The camp grew smaller in spirit and in stock. Decisions shrank to today and tomorrow, and whether to open one more tin. One man left for help when the weather allowed a start. He carried a note, some biscuits, and a line that marked direction. He did not return. The others lasted into the next season, then thinned with the light. The handwriting in the journal told its own decline. Numbers got shaky, lines broke off and started again below, unsure of the count. The last entries clipped verbs. Cold does that to your hands and to your chances. When people finally came, they found the camp like a pause. A rusted rifle leaned by a driftwood pole. A kettle sat blackened from burning seal fat that smoked and made the tent taste sweet, and sour bones lay where the ground let them rest. Notebooks survived, salted with sand and grease, still legible in most places. Rumors later blamed the ice, or bears, or politics, because those are big words that carry weight. The pages on the table said something plainer: hunger and distance. Wrangel kept most of the story. Only fragments went back south to answer letters and leave more space than words. Not every ship sinks. Some refuse to die and keep showing up like a rumor with a wake. They left her in the pack ice off Alaska in 1931, certain she would go under when the floes closed again. The crew climbed down, took what they could carry, and watched the freighter settle into a gray lane of slush. It looked like a goodbye. Then winter moved in, and the ship refused to follow orders. The Bechimo slipped free, rode a lead, and vanished into the haze. People called her a ghost because no one wanted to say they had misread the ice. She started showing up in the years after, Hunters spotted a steel hull riding low, paint scoured, nameplate dull but there. They came alongside, knocked on metal, and heard only wind. A few men climbed aboard to see if anything worth saving had survived. They found cabins stripped by weather, charts welded together by damp, and a galley door that breathed cold air like lungs. Open hatches sighed when gusts pushed through. They took what they needed, left footprints, and then the fog closed, and the ship was gone again. Word spread along the coast and inland. A salvager brought tools and a plan. He wedged a note into a doorframe, "Will return in spring," and secured a rope to the rail. The line froze so hard it rang when struck. Spring came and the ice moved like a tired animal rolling over. The rope snapped, the note waited for a hand that never came back. When the man returned with help, the Bechimo had drifted out of sight, as if the lead had swallowed her whole. Storms should have finished her, but they didn't. Winter swells hammered the hull, and each hit sounded like a bell under snow. She rode them ice that would grind a smaller craft to filings, only rearranged this one. The rigging froze and sang in crosswinds. Plates buckled and then held. People tried to trap her by tying lines to shore ice, but the ice broke first. She slipped every plan, every season. Sidings stacked up for decades. The years ticked past 1940, then 1950, then into the 1960s. Reports came from different coasts and different mouths. A black dog of a ship drifting west. A freighter anchored to nothing. No radio, no smoke, no crew. Weather could hide mistakes, but the pattern stayed. She was always afloat, always empty, always moving. Each winter, someone swore it would be the last sighting. Each winter, a new witness added a line to the ledger. Frozen spindrift on the bow, a door banging 3 times and then still. The Bechimo became a rumor made of steel and time, a ship-shaped question mark that the sea kept drawing and erasing. She never gave up a final resting place. No wreck site confirmed. No neat answer circled on a chart. Only stories, log notes, and the sound of frozen rigging humming over flat water. When a man runs instead of a ship, the chase lasts weeks, not decades, and ends at a ridgeline under a dead moon. A low cabin sat under a drift of snow. There was a cut in one wall, the kind you make when you want to see first and shoot second. In 1931, after a complaint about trap lines being tampered with, RCMP officers skied to this shack near Rat River. They called out, asked the man inside to talk. A rifle cracked through the logs. No name given, no reason, just the answer of a bullet. The officers fell back into the trees and the quiet closed in like a door. They tried a siege. They watched the place from a ridge and from a willow stand near the river. Each time someone moved, a shot tore bark or flipped snow. When they pushed in, they found the cabin dug low and reinforced, a bunker with a single slit that covered every approach. The man slipped out at night, using wind and drift to erase tracks. By dawn, he was miles away. The chase began on snowshoes and skis, over frozen rivers, across open willow flats, and into rock that stood sharp against the sky. The fugitive kept to ridgelines and traveled after dark. He walked in other people's tracks when he could, then stepped off into a patch of crust that hid him. When he crossed glare ice, he wrapped cloth around his boots to muffle the scrape. Behind him, the Mounties shared a tin of beans around a tiny stove and listened for a single twig snap or the faintest cough. They cut their talk to hand signs. Frost rhymed their eyebrows. Sleep came in shivers and quick starts. The search widened. Locals joined. Sled dogs pulled heavy. A float plane skimmed low along a valley and spotted a figure, then lost him when cloud folded down over the pass. The man doubled back through his own trail to trick the dogs and slipped through cordons that looked tight on a map. He crossed ice fields where the surface boomed under weight. No one sane tried those wide, bare plates. He did, alone, and made it. People asked who he was. He gave no name when cornered. He fought hard when trapped. He stole little, left camps tidy, and carried just enough to keep moving. When they finally boxed him at a river bend under a pale moon, he went to ground again, snow sprayed by bullets, and broke out one more time into higher country. The manhunt ran 40 days. In the last stand, the wind became a high whine across a pass. Ski edges scraped blue ice as men took cover. Shots cracked and skipped. He fell at last, face turned to the ridgeline he had been aiming for. They searched his pockets. Light, some cash, a compass, odds and ends, no papers. An autopsy later suggested excellent fitness and dental work that pointed south, but not to a person. His identity stayed a blank, and the North kept that quiet. A man without a name left only a map of footprints and questions. Whole towns can disappear faster than a single man can run and leave fewer answers. A piano sits in a corner of the culture house, still in tune, keys cold to the touch. Down the hall, a cafeteria tray holds a spoon left facing up, as if someone paused mid-lunch and never came back. This was Pyramiden, a coal town on Svalbard meant to show how life could look at the edge of the map. Greenhouse with tomatoes under glass, a gym with a full court, a library, a swimming pool that still smells faintly of chlorine when the door opens. By the late 1990s, the mines ran thin, money ran thinner, and the order came to go. The decision didn't feel dramatic to the people who lived it. It felt fast. After a plane crash in 1996 took friends and co-workers, the mood changed. Budgets tightened. Managers posted timelines. When the final date landed, workers packed what they could carry. Doors were locked. Rooms were not cleaned. Coffee cups sat half full on desks. A chessboard near a window waited on a last move. You can walk into classrooms where a child's drawing is taped crooked on a wall. Blue sun, red house, black mountains. The tape dried and curled, but it still holds. In the library, a rubber stamp sits beside a stack of returns. The ink pad cracked and open to the air. The date in the middle of a page stops mid-press, a dark half circle where a hand was called away to a bus. Summer does a little work. Grass shows through in patches between blocks, and gulls pick at the edges of a field that once held parades. Winter undoes that work quickly. Snow finds every gap and seals it. Drifts push up against doors and settle into stairwells and sharp waves. Polar bears wander through the square where miners used to smoke and talk after shift change. They lean on railings like board inspectors. Company records say the pullout happened in stages. Equipment moved first. Certain buildings were mothballed. Staff numbers dropped month by month. That's what the paperwork says. The rooms tell another version. Coats still hang by doors. A pair of boots waits at a mat. A photo of a wedding sits on a shelf, dust softening the faces. It looks like people stepped out for a fire drill and never returned. Sometimes a generator turns over for a tour. Fluorescent tubes take a second, then flicker, and a hum spreads through the hall. Snow snakes across the basketball court in the gym when a side door swings open. An old scoreboard lights once and then gives up. The air tastes of old coal and cold iron. Guides lead small groups past chairs that remember backs and coats that remember shoulders. They tell you where the greenhouse once felt like summer and where the dining hall served soup at noon. You hear footsteps echo and then fade. Pyramiden became a time capsule nobody asked for, where towns keep their shape. Some camps tell their story with torn canvas and broken bones. They found the tent half collapsed and cut open from the inside. Bare footprints led away across a slope at night with the wind cutting below freezing. The trail staggered downhill toward a sparse tree line, then spread into separate paths that faded in drifts. Back at the camp, a stove lay cold, a pipe loose, and a line slapped the canvas as the wind pulled. It looked like something had pushed 9 young hikers into the dark fast. In 1959, they had set the tent on the shoulder of a mountain in the Urals. A storm built over the ridge. Snow loaded the slope in thin slabs. Inside, they cooked, logged the day, and taped down the floor. Someone checked guy lines. Someone tuned the stove. A sudden hit, hard wind, a thump of moving snow. The tent bowing in a knife flashed. The canvas split from within. They ran light, some barefoot, some half-dressed, thinking they would circle back once the danger passed. Searchers found them in pieces, 2 by a tree with a scraped trunk, limbs broken from the lower branches, ash on the snow. Others lay between the tent and that tree line, faces to the slope, clothes shared and swapped, bodies turned toward shelter. The last 4 were in a small ravine under snow, with heavy chest injuries and a fractured skull among them. One of the group was missing eyes. On some clothes, instruments later read traces of radiation, none of it lined up clean. Each fact opened a door to a new hallway. The last easy moment sits in a diary entry about singing and fixing the stove. It reads like a normal night after a hard climb. They took photos. They joked about the weather. Then the record stops at the split canvas and a run into black. Explanations multiplied, a katabatic wind that hits like a truck and strips tents, infrasound that sets panic off in the brain, a slab avalanche that rides over a camp just deep enough to scare and break ribs without burying the site's secret tests. stranger theories that grow in the dark between facts. Each tries to fit the bruises, the injuries, the footprints, and the clothes taken from the first dead to keep warm. Recent studies point to a small slab release on that slope, a quick load that bent poles and made the tent unsafe. In the rush, some ran underdressed. Cold does its work. Paradoxical undressing explains why some were found in little clothing. The ravine makes sense of the worst trauma, a fall into a hidden stream bed under wind-packed snow. Still, each answer misses a thread. The cut tent stares back, mute and neat, and the numbers never tie in a knot you can pull tight. The site remains a knot of probabilities, tight and cold. When a machine falls from the sky here, the ice may keep it, and then hand it back decades later. A tail number went quiet in 1952 and then slept under 260 feet of glacier. Crews looked for it while the weather let them. They flew grids, set markers in the snow, and watched storms roll in like a curtain. Coordinates blurred as wind pushed drift over everything they had flagged. Radios clipped in and out. After a few weeks, the search ended with more empty miles than answers. The ice kept its own calendar and did not share. Years stacked up. The site froze deeper. Nothing moved where anyone could see it. Then a warm summer worked into the ice and the surface changed. Blue pools opened. A dark line showed in a melt channel, and then a bend of metal appeared, twisted and stained. Paint clung to a corner of skin. Numbers peered through frost, familiar enough to choke a voice on the radio. The glacier had not forgotten. It had rearranged. Recovery teams came in, tight and careful. A helicopter beat the air over melt ponds that looked bottomless. Down on the ice, people tied in and moved slow. They brushed snow from aluminum and found rivets, hinges, the lip of a wheel well. Someone lifted a duffel and read a name that the family still used at the holidays. Calls went out. The tone changed when an old number answered on a summer afternoon with a voice that had been waiting since winter. The work needed calm hands and maps made of math. Crews ran ground-penetrating radar in careful lines. They stacked returns into a picture of voids and density. Sonar eyes looked into black meltwater with blocks moving under the surface. Modelers showed how ice flows bend around rock and stretch across shallow basins. The answer was not at the point of the fall, but down glacier in a tangle of crevasses and thin bridges. They cut paths where the safe line shifted by the hour. Debris fields migrate when ice owns the ground. A wing panel can sink, planed by pressure, and rise again far from the place it went down. What falls in one square shows itself years later many valleys away. The rules feel cruel until you see them on a chart. Then they feel like gravity with a mood. The scene had a few sounds you remember. A rotor beat over blue water in cups that would swallow a truck. A gloved hand brushed ice from a buckle and paused when a letter came up under the frost. Breath steamed into the face shield and cleared again. People talked low so they could hear the ice. They moved it piece by piece. Boxes filled with parts. Tags wrote themselves into a list that grew into names. The crash resolved into people as the count matched old paperwork and missing men. Families stood at a fence line the day boxes landed, holding small photos that had followed them through houses and moves. The glacier gave up what it kept, not out of mercy, but motion. Not every flight is found. Some vanish into map lines that locals call hungry. A radio check goes normal. The pilot reads back the squawk, altitude, and route. Then a scratch of static, a clipped syllable, and nothing minutes stretch. The tower calls again, switches frequencies, asks other aircraft to listen. The long quiet settles in. By the next morning, it has a file number. By the end of the year, it's still a missing plane with a family that won't stop calling the same voicemail just to hear a voice say, "I'm wheels up, see you tonight." The Alaska Triangle is a wide bite of the map between Anchorage, Juneau, and Utqiagvik. It holds big cities, tiny villages, mountains that pull storms out of nowhere, and miles of muskeg and black spruce that swallow metal and tire tracks. People move through it every day, commuters in Cessnas, hunters on sleds, hikers who follow game trails, search crews who step into yesterday's footprints. Many make it through. Enough not to give the area a reputation that sticks. Weather turns fast here. A ceiling can go from 2,000 feet to nothing in a short valley, and fog can build over water like a wall. Wind stacks over ridges and drops hard on the lee side. The terrain hides wrecks even when you know the rough line. A white fuselage can lie in a snowfield and pass for another drift. Pines hide a crushed wing 5 feet from a trail. Compass swings and magnetic quirks don't help either. Instruments argue with the view outside. You have to choose which to trust. Myths grow in those spaces. People talk about lights, lost time, and places you don't walk after dark. The practical list is long enough to explain most files. The human list cuts deeper. A wife keeps a voicemail saved for years, plays it when the house is too quiet, listens to a laugh and a promise to bring milk from town. It is a routine call that becomes an heirloom. Official numbers blur at the edges. Since the mid-20th century, thousands are missing statewide, folded inside weather, bad decisions, mechanical failures, and places you can't search all at once. Many cases sit plainly in those categories. Enough remain blank to feed folklore, and the gaps are wide in winter. Records show this corridor buzzes with small aircraft traffic over brutal topography. FAA logs are thick. When something goes wrong, it often goes wrong in a spot where you can't put wheels down or get a signal out. Emergency locator transmitters fail in deep cold, lose antennas on impact, or bury under snow where their ping can't climb. A thin wing might skim over black spruce as clouds drop like a curtain, the pilot taking one last quick correction on the yoke before the valley folds him in. Search teams draw grids and fly them until fuel says stop. Grids overlap. Days pass. Fresh snow writes over old clues. The triangle becomes a map of absence with weather for teeth. When the missing carries a title, the search grows louder, but the ice doesn't listen. He stepped onto the small plane, gave a quick wave on the tarmac, and climbed into the right seat. October 1972. The Cessna lifted off from Anchorage for a flight southeast toward Juneau. The weather wasn't perfect, but it wasn't the worst this route had seen. On board were Congressman Hale Boggs, another official, a pilot who knew these valleys, and a staffer with a notebook in his jacket. The takeoff call sounded routine. There was no distress call that followed. The line went quiet somewhere over the ridges and fjords that divide the coast from the interior. When the radio stayed silent, the search began fast and grew huge. Military aircraft, Coast Guard cutters, Civil Air Patrol crews, state helicopters, volunteer pilots, anything that could fly or float was pressed into grids. Crews traced valleys, ran ridge lines, and crawled along glaciers at low altitude, eyes on the tree line for any torn branch or glint of aluminum. Ships moved up inlets where mountains lean into narrow water. Hours stacked. The noise never touched the silence where the plane was supposed to be. Back in offices, phones sat ready on desks that stayed quiet. Staff kept jackets on their chairs and sent notes to themselves to stay late at home. Families slept in daytime clothes, keys in pockets, waiting for the knock that would tell them where to go. Every ring turned hearts over. Most were wrong numbers or reporters. The right call didn't come. Theories bubbled. Sabotage made headlines, then stalled when evidence refused to appear. People argued over politics and grudges, but the map had its own logic. Weather hides things without malice. Terrain swallows them with patience. A small Cessna meeting, low ceiling and icing in a narrow valley has very few choices and even fewer good ones. Search leaders kept asking for an ELT ping, the emergency beacon that should scream when metal meets rock. None was heard. In that cold, antennas shear, batteries die, or the unit buries under snow ice caps and steep fjords can fold a fuselage into a shadow and hold it beneath a surface that looks untouched to anyone flying over. A cockpit compass can sit steady, then start to bounce as wind rolls off a ridge. A mountain face can arrive out of nowhere when a cloud slips across a turn and wipes out depth. The grids widened day by day. Pilots marked sectors with grease pencils, then marked them again when weather erased the work. Fuel limits won arguments about how long to stay up. Crews landed and rebriefed. Coordinates multiplied. The map filled with lines that looked like answers and felt like stalling. None of it reached the one place that mattered. No trace ever showed. No oil stain under snow. No seat cushion in a tide line. No torn paper blown against a spruce. A public life ended in private weather. Not all vanishing is sudden. Sometimes men walk to their end, one slow step at a time. Boot prints fade where the ice thins, like ink in wet paper. Down on the south coast of King William Island, a remnant of men pulled 2 boats on sledges, aiming for a place they called Starvation Cove. They were already thin. They moved because standing still meant dying faster. The path behind them held canvas scraps, broken handles, and small things that fall when hands lose feeling. Wind filled the gaps and made it look like no one ever passed. They had left the ships months before. Now the boats were lifelines and anchors at the same time. The runners screeched when they hit bare rock, the sound cut into the skull. They pushed, then lifted, then dragged again. A whispered count kept rhythm to a low ridge in the distance. The ridge never got closer. They followed the coast because the map in their head said people might be south. Every mile punished that hope. Scattered along the route, the ground gave up pieces of the march. A spoon worn thin on the bowl where one hand rubbed it clean over years. A scrap of cloth sewn with a neat name in tiny cross-stitch, the thread still holding. A button thumbed smooth. Cartridges left in a pile that said someone decided weight mattered more than a last shot. Discarded gear told a simple truth. Save energy, carry less, survive the day. Bones completed the page the journals never wrote. Knife scoring ran across long bones in straight, hard lines. Ribs showed marks you don't get from animals. Pelvis and femur ends split in ways that happen when people boil them to reach the marrow. Starvation leaves a posture in death. Knees pull toward the chest, spines curve as muscles lock. Lead traces in soft tissue from earlier in the voyage added another weight, dulling bodies and minds. None of it excused anything. All of it explained the choices left. Inuit testimony guided the first careful searches long after the ice moved on. Elders pointed to low rises and inlets not on any paper. They spoke of men seen pulling boats, of camps that lasted a night, of graves where the ground would take a shovel. Archaeologists followed and found the sites where notes never named. The trail stretched in fragments, each one a sentence finished by the land. You can stand there on a quiet day and hear work. A sled runner catches on a rock and screams. A man says, 20 more, and they move, breath hard and thin. A gull lands, watches, and lifts off again. Every cache they reached was empty. Every mile cost more than the food they had left. The cove ahead promised water, not rescue. They did not make it. The march stopped at a curl of shoreline that feeds nobody. The ledger closed itself, cold and neat, without a final word. Hunger stays behind even when the bodies don't. It grows teeth in stories about the thing that walks with winter. A cabin sits quiet under deep snow. Inside, a stew pot rests on a small iron stove. The man who ladled it out counts each bite out loud. He does it slow, like a prayer, because counting keeps the mind straight when the stomach lies. He has 2 bowls on the table and 1 spoon. He puts the second bowl away, then brings it back, then burns a spoon in the stove door to remind himself there is no second serving tonight. In subarctic winters, stories walk with the wind. They tell of a presence that makes hunger grow teeth. They say it comes when people are cut off and the cold squeezes choices down to one. The name they use is Wendigo. It turns appetite into an order you can't ignore and twists faces you know into food. When the river seals and trails vanish, the old warnings come out the same way you take out traps, early and often. Isolated camps start hearing things. A voice under the wind. A footstep outside when no one else is near. A partner who stares a little too long at your hands. Meat runs low, and every hunger becomes suspect. People salt the last strips and sleep with knives under blankets. They lock the door from the inside and stack wood against it. When a kettle rattles on the boil, nobody talks. They listen. Fear begins to police the appetite better than any rule. A father tells his kids there will be soup tomorrow if they keep the pot full today. He pulls 1 spoon from the drawer and puts the others in a box. Then he slides the bolt and burns a spare spoon black so he can't forget. The mark stays on the metal like a promise. He stares at it when the little ones sleep and the wind moves around the eaves with a human rhythm. The name carries more than myth. Winter psychosis shows up where light is short and meals are shorter. Starvation fogs thinking, heats tempers, and makes food the only thought. Communities wrapped those truths in a story that travels easy. Call it Wendigo, and you have a label that turns a private urge into a public threat. It warns without a lecture. Historical cases get debated. Some scholars call them culture-bound illness. Others hear murder laid at a spirit's feet. What is clear is what people did in response. Villages set rules for rationing and for camp placement. Elders held midwinter gatherings to check on loners. Hunters made oaths over shared kettles. Some places held fasts with witnesses so no one ate in secret. Rituals and taboos kept the living alive. Frost feathers across a window. A lock slides shut from the inside. The lamp burns low while the man counts to 10 and stops. The story survives because the winters do. Whether spirit or symptom, the warning keeps fires lit and knives put away. The ice has its own warnings too, and some come from under the water, where breath sounds like a lullaby. A mother calls her child back from a tide crack, voice flat and firm because she hears something else under the wind. The sea looks calm, dull as slate, with a skin of new ice that takes a footprint and then turns it into a puddle. The child laughs and leans forward. She reaches out and pulls the parka hood back toward shore. Out on the floe, a seal hole steams like a small pot, and the air smells of salt and metal. "Back," she says, and the word lands harder than the hand. Inuit stories say there is a green-skinned being under the floes that waits for children who wander too close. They call it Karluk. It lives along tide cracks and under black ice. It listens for small feet and for voices that forget how sound travels across a frozen bay. If a child steps where the ice is thin, the Karluk rises, soft as a breath, and pulls them down into the dark water that slides back into place without a fuss. That is the setup every child learns before they know how to tie a boot. Elders describe more than a face. They talk about the breathing under ice, long and slow, the kind you feel in your boots before you hear it in your ear. They say there is a hum that moves through the flow and into your legs, and hair like kelp drifting in the current beside a lead. When they tell it, they keep eyes on the shoreline, counting the kids who stand too close and not letting the sentence finish until everyone steps back. A mitten lies at the edge of the lead, still warm inside. The wool sags at the cuff where a small wrist slid out. That single thing holds all the weight. A parent picks it up and puts it in a pocket, not ready to shake the water from it because it still carries heat from a hand that does not know fear yet. The purpose is sharp. Stay near. Watch the cracks. Never trust a calm sea at freeze-up. The myth travels fast because it works. It turns a set of rules into a figure with a voice and a reach. The child does not have to understand currents or plate flex. They only have to fear the thing under the ice that wants them close. Ethnographers write that Karluk isn't just a story, it is living law for ice behavior. It codes child safety into something you can teach in a short walk with a point and a short sentence. The notes they keep read like field manuals: slushy edges, thin skins, places where salt water keeps a hole open when air says it should seal. A seal hole steams. A ripple moves under black ice and slides along the lid. The mother steps between the edge and the child and repeats the rule. The story keeps kids alive by giving the ocean a voice they can fear. Belief becomes a life jacket you can't see. Sometimes, though, whole villages go quiet without myth, leaving soup warm and doors open. He came in off the lake with frost in his beard and saw the first door swinging. It knocked, paused, knocked again. He called out and heard only wind sliding between houses inside. A kettle breathed on a low fire. A pot of stew still steamed. The spoon on the table held a smear of fat. He walked farther in and found a cup with a lip print iced over, the rim cloudy where heat had just left. He set it down and waited for footsteps that never came. The year most papers give is 1930. The place, Lake Anjikuni, a small settlement deep in winter. Reports say the trapper went house to house and found meals half-eaten, lamps burning, sleds ready, and sled dogs frozen in their traces outside, starved where they stood. He stepped into a sleeping room, and an empty cradle rocked once and then stopped. He checked around each corner for a note or a body. There were neither. The snow around the village lay smooth. No tracks led away. That version ran fast. Newspapers lifted it and made it clean, a village gone between one heartbeat and the next. Then the questions arrived. RCMP records later disputed the tale, pointing to errors and secondhand sources. Some said there was no official file at all. Others said the timing was off, the location wrong, the number of people inflated. The push and pull didn't kill the story. It made it harder to pin down. A few details feel like they should settle it and don't. Dates don't match from one account to the next. Names slippery. The original statement from the first witness is missing in some tellings, summarized in others, quoted without a source in many. You can spend an evening following footnotes and wind up back at the same stew pot cooling in an empty room. Each retelling sands an edge, changes a line, and the story fits the mouth it came from. Scholars who track folklore say this reads like fear stitched to distance. Places you can't reach in a day gather stories that keep people careful. A village wiped clean becomes a warning about winter, thin ice, and the way cold can make a whole place fragile. Other researchers keep the file open. They point to scattered reports of relocations, early evacuations, families leaving with help while a stranger walks in on the leftovers and writes a legend. You can see it either way and still feel the same chill. A door knocks in the wind. A cradle stops moving. A herd of dogs lies in a drift line, collars stiff and bellies empty. The snow keeps its silence, whether it's covering a mistake or a mystery. A long pause lives in that empty cup with the lip mark frozen on. Whether hoax or echo of a real absence, the feeling sticks. The village exists most strongly in the silence it sells. If absence is a story, Franklin's is the longest chapter, and the last message was calm as a winter sky. They tucked a paper into a stone cairn and wrote, "All well." Then the line ends. From there, 129 men walked into a single long corridor of ice and did not walk back. In 1845, 2 ships, Erebus and Terror, went north to find the Northwest Passage. They carried food, books, and a confidence that felt like armor. The ice stripped it fast. Winter closed around the hulls and did not open in time. Seasons turned. The ships stayed. The men shifted from crew to castaways and planned a way out on foot. They abandoned their shelter when the floes held them past any sane date. Sledges were loaded with boats, bundles, and barrels cut light. The line moved south along shore, stopping at caches and building new ones when they could. Inuit in later years told of gaunt men hauling heavy, of faces that had lost the easy look of sailors and taken on the narrow focus of the starving. They spoke of a ship still afloat later than Europe believed, seen through clear air in seasons when nobody expected a mast. Back home, letters kept leaving one house. Jane Franklin wrote with the calm of someone who refuses the wrong answer. She sent petitions, hired ships, pressed governments, and waited for an envelope that would make the house feel less empty. Her words crossed oceans for years, landing on desks and slipping into pockets, always hoping for an answer that walked off the page and through the door. The ground and the sea answered first. In 2014 and 2016, searchers found Erebus and Terror in the shallows and channels exactly where Inuit had long pointed the wrecks sat whole enough to look asleep. Inside, divers found books curled by water, instruments in their racks, dishes set like a meal was due. A spoon lay where a hand had last set it, initials cut into the metal, still readable under silt. In a quiet compartment, a bell waited, a mouth that hadn't rung in 170 winters. Science worked on the remains that did surface. Bones spoke of scurvy's damage. Tests showed lead in tissues, likely from stores and fittings that turned good meals into poison over months. The cold gave no quarter. Decisions made under those weights still spark debate. When to leave the ships, how to split parties, what to carry, what to burn. Leadership sits under glass now, judged by outcomes nobody wanted. Down in the green light, divers moved slow through intact rooms. Silt rose and settled in sheets. A hand brushed a spine and letters lifted like smoke. The ships keep secrets in slow water. Locked drawers, sealed cabins, and the space between footsteps feel close enough to touch, and still they hold back the moments that matter most. The Arctic returned the hulls, but not the last 2 steps. Not who fell first, not the word spoken before the wind took it. Even when ships reappear, the sky can still lie to your eyes and offer you cities that aren't there. A captain stared at a coastline hanging in the air, inverted and bright as noon, like land had been peeled up and pinned to the sky. The real horizon sat lower, dark and flat. He checked the chart, checked the chronometer, then went back to the rail. The shape above kept its edge. Waves rolled under a city that wasn't there. Up here, Fata Morgana and looming stack the world into layers. A temperature inversion flips the usual order. Warm air rides over cold air, and the boundary between them bends light like a lens. Ships appear tall and stretched. Islands lift off the water and hang. Sometimes the image inverts, so a cliff looks like it's upside down. Other times, the lens stacks copies of the same thing, one above the other, each a little warped. What you see can exist, just not where your eyes put it. Pilots and mariners call these days tricky. A flat sea turns into a hall of mirrors. A dark band under the sky looks like land, and a bright bar above it looks like ice. The margin where the air bulges becomes a false shoreline. Your brain trusts that line because it's steady. Instruments argue, and you find yourself asking which side to trust while the ship keeps moving. A navigator once circled a false harbor twice before speaking up. He knew the course and still felt the pull of a safe bay that glowed like a runway. He kept the doubt to himself for one long loop, ashamed he'd fallen for a trick he'd been warned about. On the second pass, the altimeter and the log won the argument, and the harbor thinned into mist like breath on glass. These mirages stayed sticky on charts. Phantom lands, Crocker, Sanikoff, and others lingered because officers wrote what they saw and trusted their own eyes over numbers. A line of dark on a hard blue day became an island on paper. Years later, surveys scrubbed them off the map, but the notes remain in logs that read like they were certain at the time. Training now tells crews to distrust miracles. Refractive gradients can raise or erase targets, make a ship ride above the sea or sink below it. Radar returns help, but even those can smear when the air bends beams. Pilots practice approaches with fake horizons. Mariners learn to read the low band of dark under a mirage, the one hint that the real ocean is still where it should be. You can see it plain on some evenings. An upside-down schooner glides above a dark strip of water. A runway appears wide and straight, then fades as you start down. Each illusion looks like mercy when you need it, a shortcut to safety, a promise that the distance is shorter than it feels. The Arctic will give you a sign if it can also take it back, and when people build real shelters on real ice, the ground itself starts walking away. A scientist jotted wind speed, capped the pencil with numb fingers, and felt the wall crack. The bench slid an inch. Coffee sloshed out of a tin mug and ran in a thin line toward the door. Outside, the horizon had a new seam. The whole lab rode a flow the size of a neighborhood, and the neighborhood had started to walk. During the Cold War, crews built small towns on moving ice. They planted flags, ran radios, stacked bunks 3 high, and called it a station. The ground was a floe or an ice island, sometimes thick as a building, sometimes thin enough to shudder when a snowcat passed. They cut a strip flat and called it a runway. They wired antennas to poles that threw long shadows at noon. The ice never stopped working. It shifted in slow fits. Cracks opened like zippers. A straight runway became a broken jaw overnight. Planes circled and waved off. Evacuation orders snapped out while the sky closed in. Men hauled boxes to the edge in a whiteout, following a rope line that went slack when the anchor moved. You could see a year of work leave on a gust. Inside the radio shack, the voice kept the schedule. Weather first, drift next, then the human detail. Generator behavior, fuel, a part that needed a drop of oil. The last sentence broke mid-word when the generator coughed, lights flickered, and the antenna snapped in a gust you didn't feel until it was gone. After that, the set only hissed. The man in the chair waited for a tone that would not come back. Stations like T3, also called Fletcher's Ice Island, and Soviet NP series camps rode the currents for years. Some drifted across whole sectors of ocean, carrying labs, shops, and a tiny bar with 2 stools. They sent up weather balloons that vanished into glare. They drilled through blue ice for cores that squealed when lifted. Then one day a lead opened under the mess hall, or a ridge pushed through the runway, and the plan changed to leaving. The work mattered. Air pressure, temperature, sea ice thickness, and drift fed into models that live in today's forecasts. Much of it made it home, but the logs have scars. Pages end without a sign-off where flows broke at night. A new hand picks up months later with a note about relocation, and you fill the gap with the sound of a snowcat idling at the edge of a fresh lead. You learn to drink from a half-full mug because the floor could tilt without warning. You learn to sleep in your boots. Coordinates slipped like dates. You would write a position and find that the map had moved under you. Charts grew obsolete while you were still on them, and resupply flights chased a base that drifted away as they flew. These bases didn't close. They were erased in motion. We started with voices and engines. We end with the sound the ice makes when it decides to keep something. The Arctic keeps what it wants. Sometimes a diary, sometimes a bell, sometimes nothing at all. Names fade while a spoon, a buckle, or a stamp stays put, like the place prefers small proofs over full answers. You carry one detail out with you and it won't let go. If a name in this list pulled at you, share the one detail you can't shake. A radio that went quiet, a note that said, "All well," a door knocking in the wind. That's how these stories keep a light on. Before you go, listen. The quiet up there isn't empty. It's busy, erasing footprints. If you made it this far, you felt it too. That hush the Arctic leaves behind when the last voice goes quiet. If you're still here, you're one of the last two awake. Tap like, subscribe, and tell me which story stayed with you after the cold faded. I'm reading every one.